episode of the Be Better podcast. And with me today, I'm actually super excited because it is Tim Squared. And when you have Tim Squared, you just don't know what's going to happen. And beyond it being Tim Squared, it is Tim of Purpose #1, Tim O'Brien from Purpose Made. Tim, how's it going?
Yeah, it's awesome. It's great to be here. I feel like, back in the days when the B Corp movement started, you were one of the Tims that we kind of connected with, and it's been a long journey. So it's exciting to have this conversation.
It is, mate, because I was actually thinking of that just the other day. So we first met 2017, I think it was, in person at the Social Enterprise World Forum in Otatahi, Christchurch, and that literally feels like a lifetime ago.
It does. I think you may have even picked me up from the airport, and I think that was
you might be right.
That was really nice, actually.
Oh, look,
concierge service.
Yeah, don't tell everyone.
Oh, okay, sorry. If your name's Tim, you might get picked up by Tim.
If you're Tim and in a B Corp, sure.
All right.
Anyone else, there's this thing called Uber. No, I'm pretty good. I gave someone a lift the other day. I'm genuinely a nice, friendly guy who will try and help people out where I can. So I appreciate that. So yeah, and we were, I guess, calling each other Tim One of Purpose, but I genuinely feel that you are Tim One of Purpose because you were leading the way, and you're certainly someone who I've looked up to in terms of B Corp purpose and impact. So I fully grant you the Tim One of Purpose title. I'm happy to be Tim Two of Purpose, and we need to go and find Tim 3 and 4 and 5 and build a collective, maybe our own little Facebook group or community of Tims of Purpose. But anyway, enough silly talk about such things. For those people who don't know who you are, which I can't imagine is that many people, but for the 2 people listening who don't know who Tim O'Brien is, who are you?
So yeah, Tim O'Brien, I'm the founder and CEO of an organization called Purpose Made. That was sort of rebranded and elevated out of an organization called Hatch, which we founded in 2016. It was one of the early B Corps, and the work we do is really about embedding purpose in impact into organizations. And what we're really passionate about is solving social, environmental, and cultural issues through the power of business. And the work we do sort of falls into 3 categories. One is sort of ESG plus. So how do you take organizations to really differentiate and create value through the lens of ESG or B Corp as the kind of they kind of group together in my mind. The second one is impact measurement design. So how do you actually develop impact measurement solutions across that kind of range of different impacts, which is pretty challenging, but also really important if you want to become a B Corp, but also for increased reporting standards that are coming at the moment, particularly for the bigger organizations. Mm-hmm. And then the third piece is something we call regenerative finance, which is a pretty fancy name for saying, how do you fund things using a range of different types of capital, whether that's an investment or a grant or innovation, where you're really looking to create a systems level outcome or change, where there's a big, wicked, challenging problem that has us probably getting out of control and spiraling out of control. And either your organization or you're trying to invest and fund it to try and solve it. How do you get to the right root causes and levers of that change to make real change happen? So they're the 3 things we do. Nice.
And so that's possibly keeping you quite busy, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's an interesting time. I mean, I was reflecting back when you picked me up at the airport, and when I kind of came out, and we'll get to probably that story around me coming out of a corporate and setting up Hatched. It was very early days around purpose and impact. Like even ESG wasn't a thing back then. And this idea around B Corps, it felt a little bit wacky when you talked about it, and you're really convincing people that, this impact is fundamental. And it's also sort of what we called back in the days, which we'll go into later on, one of the biggest risks for organizations who aren't going down this track and just focusing on profits. So it's interesting that the market's really caught up now. And I was at an investor relations conference last week and speaking about the future of ESG and the sophistication around investors and their needs around impact and certification and transparency, and the job that those companies, the private companies and public companies, are looking to attract capital to actually meet the sort of ESG criteria is pretty interesting. So we're at a wave now where everything's there's a bit of a gold rush in this space, I suppose you could call it, with a lot of people entering. But in terms of doing real work with real integrity, there's a significant need for it, and which is great because that means that the power of business is actually helping solve big important problems that society and the environment need to solve for.
So what do you think is driving this big interest in that investor world?
Yeah, I think part of the challenge is if you look at the wholesale investors and also the super funds, their members are actually, who are investing in, are actually asking those questions around where's my money going? obviously there's a need for not being put into sort of high investments that have a high carbon footprint. So there's a lot of a need to sort of avoid ones that do a lot of harm. But there's also this intention to say, actually, I want to make sure that the companies are doing the right thing. So they're looking after the modern slavery. They're making sure they're accounting for the environmental footprint. There's increased regulations or reporting requirements coming in around making sure that deforestation in Europe and also around natural capital are accounted for organizations. So there's one part of that, making sure there's a bit of that do no harm component of my investment. And there's a responsibility for those wholesale and super funds who are handling that money to make sure it's not going there. And then there's an increasing movement to say, hang on, we not just want to go beyond do no harm. Let's support those organizations that are actually helping solve for those problems. And there's two reasons behind that, I think. I think one is they actually are, have been proven to give good returns. So those organizations that are probably really relevant because they are solving an environmental, social, cultural problem that is a need in the world are actually, performing quite well financially. So it makes good sense to make an investment in that space. But secondly, there's also this sort of moral compass I think is growing amongst investors, particularly the younger generation, which is saying we want to make sure that the future we're creating is one we want to live in. So we're really conscious and aware of where our money goes. We're making sure that those companies are actually held to account around their environmental, social, and their good governance. And there's some really interesting stuff happening around active sort of corporate sort of activism and investment activism, which is actually shifting those companies to do that. And I think it's really happening in interesting ways, probably in the US where we do some work, and in Europe there's some sort of a greater level of maturity, but it's really hitting home in Australia at the moment. And I think those CEOs and boards are sort of sticking their heads up and realizing that this is not only a thing that they need to do for compliance and a whole range of reasons, but also it's a really good thing to do because it's great for their culture. It's great for attracting investment and ideally good for innovation and value creation, which if we've got value creation that's solving problems, then we're in a really good spot, I think. So the more of that, the better.
Yeah, it does feel that there's been we're in the middle of a rapid acceleration of mindset change around. It felt like up until quite recently, sustainability was the old health and safety, where we're going to wheel this person out. Hey, have we broken any laws? Are we good for compliance? Great. Okay, see you in 6 months at the next meeting. To all of a sudden, there's a maturity and a level of interest. And I think, because Kathmandu, but obviously, Trans-Tasman company, headquartered in Christchurch here, they were issued I think 100 million Australian dollar loan in 2021, I think it was, from ANZ Bank. And one of the stipulations was they need to maintain and increase their B Corp score.
Wow.
And talking to the team that from ANZ in New Zealand who created that vehicle, it was really interesting. Exactly what you were just saying, that there's this real sea change in the people running the funds. And a lot of them are our age, I guess, early 40s, mid 40s. They've got kids and they actually genuinely care about what's going on. Whereas maybe prior to that, the finance industry, perhaps not best known for its lens on social and environmental impact. It was just doing what it was designed to do, maximize returns. So I think that's really, really, I don't think we can probably actually measure the speed of change that's happening right now.
Yeah,
but I guess you've got some sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I do think there is a generational element here as well. So like you said before, there was sort of the slightly older generation than ours was sort of leading those organizations, still probably are, but the wave of new leadership coming in, either in the funds or in those organizations, are creating a shift. And I think if you look at, we do a lot of research in the US, we look at cause affinity and certain elements that organizations need to focus on. And you can see a distinct difference between the generations. So you've got the younger generations, sort of the Gen Zs coming through, where that is like ingrained into their soul almost around impact. It's like a not negotiable. So that as that generation kind of grows and with coming into the workforce and then influencing decision making, that's going to accelerate that even further. Then you kind of got the millennials and the Gen Xers who are they've got those leadership roles. That's a big thing that they really focus on and they care about. And then as the boomers sort of shift out of the workforce, there's a big, interesting intergenerational change happening. And people are also able to look forward time frames. So instead of saying, okay, I care about what's happening in the next 3 to 5 years, which even in the business world, normally it's 12 to 24 months that you're looking at the next horizon to say, where's the financial results? People are looking forward and saying, what's happening in 10 years' time? What's happening in 15? What's going to happen for my children? So they're actually caring about more like, 30, 50, 100-year time horizons. And that gives you a different sense of responsibility for what that organization needs to do, not only in keeping it relevant so it can survive, but also mostly, what world's it creating for the people that comes after us.
Yeah, I think we're pretty good at thinking in daily patterns. Yeah. And sometimes I even struggle to know what I'm doing after this, recording this podcast. And I remember we helped a company, Trinio. The company no longer exists because actually they got acquired by another B Corp, a Canadian B Corp. And then that Canadian B Corp got acquired by Salesforce. So, hashtag B Corps, do okay. Abhinav, one of their co-founders, he is of Indian heritage, and he was saying he was talking to his brother, I think it was his brother or his cousin, who worked for a locksmiths in India that had been around for about 200 years. Wow. And the shortest business plan they had was a 100-year business plan.
Wow.
And he, working in a high growth tech startup where it's, daily acquisition rates, how many customers, yeah, that was. And I think it is, there's a guy, John Viveki, who's a professor, I think it's Toronto University. There's a phrase he's got, which is called combinatorially explosive, which is, it's literally like, it blows your ability to conceive a topic. And yeah, that stuff is, and I guess, the Western democratized world, we're pretty good at thinking short term, whereas a lot of other cultures perhaps have been a bit better at not caring about the daily cycle and thinking on that broader. Yeah.
And I think as leaders become more emotionally healthy and have that more like greater perspective and awareness, that's where I think things start to shift and change. Because if you're looking at a boardroom or you're an exec and you're trying to make a decision to do X, Y, and Z, and you can certainly see the environmental impact that's going to create, or you can start to see that impact that's going to create directly in the staff, you're more aware of the decision as opposed to, hang on, that's just going to make us more money and I get my bonus. But the key trick with that element, not the trick, but the key challenge, I think, with this shift occurring is that you still need to operationalize that into business. So you need to build that into, executives and leaders and staff's scorecards, and understand that, impact, with whatever way you define, that's actually part of the everyday business. Yep. And saying the same metrics with clicks and sales and widgets, etc. The purpose component needs to be, an impact component needs directly alongside it. And there's a lot of the importance of that can't be underestimated, because if a leader does change or if someone gets bought out and they're a B Corp and there's a new owner like Salesforce, the importance of that impact and that purpose and that culture needs to be held on. And that's why B Corp is a really good mechanism for that. But more broadly, it's also about how do you kind of take a long-term horizon, but also be able to operationalize that so you can think about today, but also think about tomorrow at the same time. And I think that's the kind of emotionally healthy, perspective shifting, important capability that we need in our leaders, and just pretty much anyone in the organization to be able to think that kind of like duality between purpose and profit at the same time.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's a really interesting time to be involved in this whole world. But no, 100% agree that, and that's what I like B Corp, because it helps you take the intangible or the slightly less tangible and purpose, doing good, impact. Okay, like you say, making a scorecard. So what is a measurement that, and don't be afraid to get it wrong first time round. Like we might think, that whole unintended consequences. We think that this is the outcome, but or the metric we need to measure. We think this is the output. We think this is the outcome. Great. Well, let's test it. And it's better that we're testing that and finding out rather than not testing it and still chasing the older style metrics.
No,
it's super cool. And so have you always been doing this type of stuff? I know you obviously alluded to you come from a bit of a finance industry background.
No. My background's always, when I kind of came out of university, went into sort of data and innovation and worked a lot in the UK and in the US, working for companies like Mastercard and Vodafone. And what we did was essentially help them build new products and services. And the pretty key kind of turning point in my life was two kind of tracks that were happening. One at the same time, I started to get really aware of sort of what I was purchasing in terms of the fruit and vegetables, and particularly like sustainable fish. I got really obsessed by it, like particularly because I was going to farms and I was going to pubs and sort of ones that were really about traceability of supply chains, talking 15 years ago, which was something that most people didn't care about or were aware of. And I was really interested in the provenance of what I was eating. And if you kind of complemented that by the work I was doing, it was really in the finance industry largely, and obviously in telecommunications, and it was all about helping build new services. So it was early days around apps and sort of new phones and products that Vodafone were creating, and building in incentive schemes for organizations to innovate more often, and measurements and things like that. And then there was a big moment where we were working with MasterCard, and we supported them to help launch MasterCard PayPass, which is the little tap and go situation. I remember we're in London and walking down to get my coffee in the morning, and the whole insight that we came up with was all about how do you get people to start, Europeans in particular, who are very committed to the cash, to start doing lower purchases and building in these sort of tap and go systems, so it felt a bit easier, and there was an element to that. And I remember walking in, and there was one of the first terminals at this new cafe that was open, and I looked up, and one of the first sort of MasterCard PayPass ads were on, and I was like, holy moly, this is a pretty interesting moment in my life. And although it was an amazing project and I love working with that client on creating it, it really hit home to me that there was an unintended consequence of this work. And I looked up and I thought, this is going to disconnect people from money. They're going to be more likely to spend and not aware of how much money they've got in their bank account. And it started to make me realize that if you could create a product or service which was both, fulfilled a immediate need like convenience, but also help people be more financially well, that would be much better off. So that kind of triggered my purpose journey, where I got very interested in organizations that were, environmentally or socially minded, and embedding that into their business model. I found myself back in Australia working for Suncorp, which was a financial services company. And it was very interesting that we built an emerging risk or a strategic innovation capability for the organization, where we're basically going out into the world, understanding what the big things that could disrupt that organization were, and informing the board around the things that need to shift and change. And at that point, this is when my kind of like moment where I was like, business needs to change, and wasn't really sure of how that might eventuate. And the projects that I got to lead, which was really amazing, were working with B Lab and understanding and helping sort of support that movement in Australia when it first came here in its real infancy. So we kind of funded it, and I got very intimately involved in it, working with social enterprises in New Zealand and in Europe, working with WikiHouse and alternative architecture, which was fascinating. Looking at the roots of integrated reporting, integrated thinking in South Africa, and how that was about how you report financial, non-financial value together. Working with Climate Kick in Europe, looking at how climate innovation could really fund and help us tackle that real challenge around global warming. And those elements for me started to think about new models and new ways of doing things. And it was evident that instead of sort of helping a large organization remain relevant, which was a very, it was fulfilling work, I just had this calling where I was like, I can't get any better anymore and do that. I need to go and support those organizations who are directly solving problems and meeting these challenges I'm seeing. So I was lucky enough to be part of that B Corp network, and through that, it was evident that I could support a couple of the larger B Corps, and I started my first business called Hatched, which was a B Corp since March 2017, and really started to work out what purpose strategy was, what impact strategy was, how to measure things, and actually pioneered best practice around how to certify B Corps or recertify. So amazing time, a lot of discovery in that piece, but it was pretty amazing.
I reckon. Yeah. So do you think, so you had this kind of transition moment, or this transformational moment, but do you think young Tim running around, did you have an element of purpose? Like, was there a purposeful upbringing when you were younger, or was it sort of pretty, sort of standard upbringing of, go to school, go get a job, maybe go to uni, and, just get on the mill? Or were there any hints?
It was more like that. I think if you look at my origins, was more of a sort of middle to lower class family coming out of the western suburbs of Sydney, and my parents, having a university degree, which my brother and I got, was very rare for that whole family. So that was a huge achievement. And my parents, looked after us. We had a lovely childhood. But my I talk about it like about perspective. Like I didn't know, like for me, when I remember walking down uni and I had to work hard at uni to sort of support myself, I remember walking down and seeing someone in a suit and like, I'd love to just have a job one day where I don't have to work on the weekends. And so that was sort of my kind of like upbringing, though there was elements that my parents did around sort of supporting with a little bit of community work, and there was a bit of justice and fairness that my parents embedded, but I wouldn't say that was something that was sort of, embedded in me as a youngster. I think as I kind of like left the shores of Australia and had those moments overseas, I also met my wife, who has this sort of different way of like thinking about the world. That's when my idea about perspective started to shift, and realize that, there is different possibilities in the world. And that's what really started to intrigue me, is around, well, work could be anything. Work-life balance can be, where you can live can be anything. I got really intrigued by like life design and like life hacking in really interesting ways. And I think from that perspective, I started to look at work and think about work in a different way, and seeing, people working long hours and obviously doing work that they maybe weren't necessarily motivated by was probably more of a catalyst to me than thinking there's got to be a different way. There's got to be something more meaningful that people can do that can contribute both to their own kind of getting up in the morning and feeling like they're being fulfilled, but also it helps them be more healthy because they're more attached to something that they care about. So there was a bit of a passion around, let's change the way currently things are done. And I think that kind of catalyst, and then working through the possibilities of different work and different models, and discovering the importance of and damage that organizations who just focus on profit can do, and being involved, I worked for a number of those organizations, through the early parts of my career, and seeing those cultures and realizing this doesn't feel right. There's something wrong about, this sort of intense sales culture and pretty blokey bro culture, particularly in some of the media outlets that I worked in, which I won't mention, and realizing there's got to be a better way. And I think those questions around possibility, seeing sort of way that work can damage people in terms of profit, but also individually, I was like, and then realizing as I went through that journey that there is a way to help solve these massive problems that we're dealing with, all kind of culminated in me saying, there's no other, I can't not do this. This is the only thing I can do now. And that intensifies over time as well. Like every day we get out in the morning and we're working directly in really challenging problems like decarbonisation, women's violence, these big challenging problems that you can go to bed at night and it spins your brain around. But every morning we get up in the morning, like, how can we solve this? How can we go quicker, better, faster, smarter, and around helping solve these problems, because the world needs it. Because if anything, they're all accelerating, and potentially it's a world that we don't necessarily want to live in the future.
Yeah, I think so much good stuff there. I think I always reflect back. There was a YouGov survey in the UK. I think it was about 2017 or 2018, and it was around about 30% of UK employees surveyed felt that their job provided them with no meaning, and it was more than likely contributing to destroying the planet. And you just kind of go, that those are the ones that admitted it. How many people that were surveyed were worried that their boss might find out, no, I love my job. Yeah, it's really great. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, that's a huge percentage of people back then.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see. I haven't checked the stats recently to see if that's been updated. But I was talking to Abdi from Drift Time on my last episode of the podcast, and similar kind of just conversations that he had. He was working in ad agencies in London and what have you, and seeing their work go up, and it's kind of like, so what? We've just helped the company sell more stuff. But is that making it a positive difference? And I think, people need that sense of meaning and contribution and purpose in life. And if you don't have it, the dis-ease will lead to disease. And if you're not at ease with the work that you're doing, and I think a lot of people don't realize how much of that is subconscious. You don't recognize the damage that doing the work that you don't actually enjoy, that deep down is possibly not making the world a better place, and actually might be making the world a worse place. The deep down damage that has on you, but also makes you not be the best version of you, which then impacts family, friends, kids, wives, partners, what have you. Untold amounts of damage.
Yeah, and I mean, there's elements of work that are necessities, and people obviously need to work to get by. But I think in any organization, there is there is that piece about like, well, I need to put food on the table, and those are all elements, and obviously the cost of living is increasing, so it's challenging. But there's great companies out there that have people probably on lower salaries and working in factories, etc. And we just did some B Corp work with a great organization that manufactures windows, and we did a survey for the diversity, equity, inclusion. It was a very diverse workforce, but if you looked at the survey responses from people, probably from probably like different cultural backgrounds, haven't gone to university, from lower socioeconomic groups. Obviously, they're getting paid well for what their work they're doing. But if you look at the results and you see the meaning, the purpose, the connection, the ability for them to speak up and feel heard, it's amazing to see that in the workforce. And any organization can create that and should be able to create that.
Yep.
And I think it's also worth noting that the purpose work and impact work, that's not easy work. We're talking about generally, you're embedding a social, economic, or cultural problem into solving that through your business. And that's a really challenging thing generally, because it's a big, probably wicked problem you're trying to contribute to. But I think the difference is, even though it's, you still get exhausted, there is burnout from founders, there's a whole range of those elements. Once you know that you're contributing to something that's creating the world a better place, there's a different feeling which is associated to it. And the thrill, I don't know if it's a thrill, but the real reward that we get, and we pride ourselves on the quality of the work, is when you start to see, if you can measure something and make that very tangible for someone, that they're doing really important work, say, for example, in domestic violence, or you can take a pretty wicked problem and help work out a better pathway to solve it. For example, looking at prevention in mental health, or helping understand the social cost of decarbonisation, and then shifting that to make sure there's a net positive. And you start to see the work that you've done start to have that positive difference in people's lives. That feeling is like nothing else. So you contrast that to the feeling I had when I saw the MasterCard PayPass thing pop up on the ad, and I should have been probably excited about it, versus seeing a domestic violence program go in that we've helped support or measure, or things like that. That feeling is like nothing. And you might see someone's, tears in someone's eyes, or a program directly affects someone positively, or that you've shifted the dial on the environment significantly. You're like, that's a feeling that is really special, and is also it's the lot's gone into it, but that's the kind of feeling that you want people to be rewarded on, not a big sale that's put money into their pocket. You want to make it financially rewarding, but it's something when they go, I've helped someone today and I've made a difference. That's something that is very special, I think.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think, again, that the sort of the modern world, particularly the modern business world, is all about that incentivization of performance, typically around widgets shipped, dollars invoiced, what have you. But yeah, the real humans are designed for that contribution, and to be able to, there is a human at the end of every value chain, and it's understanding that contribution that you've made. And that's something that we try and get people to understand with purpose work we do with companies, particularly people like, if you're 10 steps removed from the end user, from the customer, it's just another line of code, or it's just another spreadsheet that you're filling in, or it's another thing that you've got to ship out. But you've got to make that connection to, well, what good have we actually done? And even in some companies that might seem quite unpurposeful, there is actually still an element of contribution and purpose, and you've got that as a base. Great. Well, now let's understand, how do we do more of that, or how do we now pivot that a little bit, or transition that a little bit, so it's that's good. I guess I always sort of make the argument, you can make an argument that vaping or cigarettes have got a purpose, in that there is some positive contribution that they make. There's social connections that you can make by being a smoker, hanging out with other smokers. It can suppress your appetite, so if you wanted to lose some weight, theoretically smoking could be an avenue. There's there's an element that you can sort of say, actually, there is a purpose to it, but there's obviously a net negative impact overall from doing that. So you can identify the purpose, but okay, well, how do we get the social connection and maybe the weight loss without having the lung cancer and the tar and the environmental destruction of the cigarette butts floating around? So it's just interesting, the whole purpose thing. I mean, I think it's, well, possibly a segue, because I remember it was a few months ago now, you wrote on LinkedIn about how you said purpose statements are dead. Long live the purpose statements are dead, long live the impact statement. Which I think, and there was some good commentary on it. And I just think for me, I just think still that not enough people actually have even authentically connected to their purpose. You know, they typically, it annoys me. I have heard of tax accountants helping companies do purpose statements. Slightly above that is maybe a marketing brand agency where you're going to get something a little bit more sexy and exciting. As people will know, long-term listeners, people who've attended a workshop with me, I really dislike accountants and finance people, but that's because I just don't understand numbers. So it's purely projection on my behalf. You're all lovely people. Honestly, I love you all. So yeah, brand and marketing agency. Yeah, you're going to get slightly more sexy, slightly more connected to your customer purpose statement. But unless you actually do some deep work to understand who you are, the bad that you do, the good that you do, you know, almost doing the shadow work from a Jungian perspective at a corporate level to understand the good and the bad. How do we actually contribute? What meaning does that give us? Like, you know, and what does it actually contribute to the person? Then yeah, I kind of think purpose statements. But yeah, your context around that was you're more around focus more on the theory of change, your impact rather than the purpose statements. Yes, maybe just sort of unpack that for us a little bit.
Yeah, I think the kind of like the insight that we had around the purpose statements, and when we first started, 2016, we were doing a lot of that definition, those purpose statements, doing a lot of that deep work, a lot of that self-reflection of organizations said, look, if this is the model, the purpose you want to go to, the impact model you want to create, what are you not doing and what are the negative things? And doing that deep work, for it could be 1, 2, 3 years that we go through that with organizations. And those organizations that have done that have gone on to be, phenomenally successful and do great work. And as we sort of evolved and other people sort of got into this space, we found that purpose statements weren't necessarily used to really deeply articulate the deep why that an organization exists, but that normally has an impact that's related to it, the problem they're trying to solve and someone that benefits. It was being much more used for a branding exercise to sort of help sell more products, or articulate it as almost like a new way to articulate like a marketing strap line. And the insight was that that's actually quite dangerous, because you might set a purpose statement up, and what you haven't done is gone on to define the impact you want to create, look at the negative impact that you're doing. You don't actually understand how your products align to that. What you're trying to do is actually create a purpose statement and a campaign that goes off against it. And I think a really great recent example of that was Bud Light. So Bud Light, obviously it's a beer company in the US. They had I think it's a new CMO come in recently, an amazing woman. What they did is they had this really desire to champion diversity and really start to expand Bud Light's market, which is a great incentive, right? And obviously, I don't know what work that they did internally, but what they did in the end is actually sort of champion a transgender individual who promoted the brand, which was a great idea in its essence. But what they didn't do is actually look at the size of that challenge, and they did the deep work. So if you want to look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, and particularly in the US, we do quite a lot of work here and really understand that, the size of that challenge and the issue. There would have been other steps that you may have taken over time to actually deeply address that issue. And that was obviously a great idea and way to go forward, to actually look at how you go about, changing advertising and making it more inclusive. But that wasn't a really key lever, and actually probably did more damage to the brand and it could have maybe solidified and angered that base that you're trying to shift over time. So what we're sort of saying is that, firstly, don't just have a purpose statement. Again, it's a bit like values back in the day. We stick it up on a wall and you're probably using it to sell a product. You might attach a social cause to it and say, hey, we're supporting this, and this is our statement, and here's our new lollipop. That's not purpose. That's not impact. And it happens time after time. Like now, we don't really do that work, deep the purpose statements anymore. What we believe that theory of change can do is almost give organizations the ability to say, this is the issue we're taking. So, for example, we did a project in collaboration with a B Corp in the US called Conspiracy of Love, and we took Adidas's big social challenge, and they want to get 1 billion people out of poverty through the power of sport. And you can probably do that in a superficial way with a sort of a version of a purpose statement and go off and do it. We did a deep work with them to understand what are the pathways to really get inclusivity through the power of sport, and then use that as a way to provide economic inclusion. And that deep theory of change work set them up to look at their spend and their advertising and their work really deeply in that organization. To me, that is really powerful, because that is deep business model design, deep issue, really understanding the issue, and then starting to paint the pathways for that impact. So my point there was that purpose statements are actually really powerful if done well, but because it's become a bit of a trend to be implementing them, and it's done in a shallow way. It's actually become more dangerous to have a purpose statement that's not done well. And so you're better off starting with a theory of change to really understand the issue that you're trying to help solve for, your business capabilities, your gaps, the things you need to work on, and then understanding what the best pathways to achieve that are. And that's the best way to actually have an impact and have solve those issues. And a purpose statement's useful, but generally it should be an articulation of that, not just the superficial words that you're putting together to make yourself feel a little bit better or kind of take advantage of the trend. And I see a lot of that work coming, and I was surprised at the reception of that sort of coming out. It was a bit of a provocation that I put together, but there was a lot of agreement from great practitioners that we collaborate with and work with and admire, saying, look, we're seeing a lot of that too, and it's dangerous. And, there's some different other ways that maybe achieve it, but it was an interesting consensus across a lot of people saying, we're seeing this, and it is fairly damaging at the moment, and it's giving people a bit of a false sense of impact in some of those organizations who maybe think they might be doing it well, but potentially might not be getting the right support that they needed in order to do this work well.
No, and I totally agree. And I think it's interesting though, because I often wonder, you're talking regenerative finance. I've got one eye on the whole regenerative business concept, and my loose description of that is, every dollar of product or service we sell only has a positive contribution. Well, at the minute, there's probably a handful of companies that you could point to who are actually even close to that or truly operating in a regenerative manner, other than obviously regenerative farming or agriculture, where it's slightly more obvious to go, yes, this is a complete circular, natural-based system. But, for a service company to be a regenerative company, and I still think there's sort of stages that company, almost like stages of maturity. But whether do you think the majority of companies, because I kind of look and go, well, look, we've got 6,000 B Corps globally, or just over. That's about 0.01% of the global business world, based on a quick Google search of how many limited registered companies are there globally. So we've got about 0.01% of companies globally have met the B Corp standard. Do you think the general business world is ready to go from mindset right now is we trade legally and we trade solvently to impact-driven theory of change model? Do you think we're at the stage where enough companies could go straight to that, or do you think there needs to be an element of, look, let's actually just get you a better purpose statement to get you kind of thinking at a higher level here, and then once you've done that maybe for a year or a couple of years, hey, let's actually now think about, well, what difference have you done? Let's actually do some impact measurement and reporting to see, has the purpose statement made a difference? Then, hey, actually, and I guess for us as practitioners, do you think, because at the minute that's kind of how we operate, it's like, let's just get you to be B Corp, let's get you thinking differently, let's help you understand there's a range of other things that you need to be thinking about, reporting, understanding, get these as KPIs for your team, let's get that baked in as that's now your new business as usual? Or do you think we need to be pushing people, and are people ready, do you think, to go, right, do you know what, actually, we're going to pause your business for a month, and you keep doing what you're doing, but in a month's time, we're going to have this whole theory of change, or 6 months' time, we have this theory of change, impact, and we're going to flip your business, as quickly as we can to this new model? Thoughts on a lot of questions.
There's a lot in that. I think in that kind of like spectrum of like traditional business all the way to sort of deeply embedded impact, and every dollar is actually creating direct net positive impact. If you kind of spin all the way to a future world in that space, that'd be ideal. And every time we do the work, we're always aiming that every single sale, every dollar is actually creating a net positive impact. And that, I think, is still, I don't think it's still as niche as maybe we're talking about. I think there is a lot of organizations out there that if you look at it, for example, again, I think I use Thermoco as an example, who we're just supporting now through a process. If you look at their work, they create really amazing windows that have huge thermal values. So it significantly reduces heating and cooling. And it also uses very local supply chains, and their environmental footprint is very low. So if you look at that organization, I'd say every dollar that they're creating is having a net positive impact. There's a small amount of environmental footprint they need to account for, but that's sort of part of, people need windows and buildings, and what they're producing is significantly better than the alternative. But if you kind of like look at a world where all organizations are there and you're kind of ignoring the fact that all businesses do need to make a profit, and ideally they're actually having a net positive impact as well at the same time, there's a significant challenge we have, I think, in the economy, where there's a lot of questions around, is that model sustainable long term? Is there, this movement around degrowth and the idea that consumerism is out of control? So there's a lot of debate, I think, philosophically about, is that possible, and is it a world that we need to shift to? And to some degree, I'd love to be idealistic and say that's going to happen, but I think there's a long journey to get there. And my being slightly pragmatic and maybe a little bit knowing that if you can infiltrate around 3 to 4% of a system, you actually create very big difference and change. So we can get that 0.0006% of the world to be B Corps up to 3 to 4%. That's when the economy starts to shift. And there are organizations that might not be B Corp. So we're talking about, organizations that have, net positive impact through sale. I think that's a really good way of describing it. So taking that into account, we need to make sure that those organizations who are having a net positive impact for every dollar they spend are not necessarily growing. They might have their own version of scale, but they're the ones that people are buying, investing in, or working for, because that's when the more that people sell, the bigger impact that's going to be created. And I think what we need to make sure is that those organizations who are looking at this and saying, I might need to flip my business model over time and I'm not going to make money. What we're saying is you're going to make more money from doing this work, and you're going to do it well with integrity, and it's going to have a big impact. That's what I believe will actually shift the economy into that space. And I think it's happening. And if you then sort of move back down that spectrum, and those organizations who probably only have a profit mindset, and this goes to the comments earlier on around the work we're doing. And we do a lot of work with medium and small businesses to become B Corps, but the large amount of work we sort of have transitioned to in the last 12 to 18 months is bigger businesses and organizations who are private companies with a big footprint, or public listed companies who have investors and a whole range of different dynamics happening. And I think the idea here is that, there is a journey that those organizations need to go on, but it's a quicker journey than saying, hey, I think there's a difference between saying become a B Corp. I think if you go through the process and get certified and be a B Corp, there's a lot of transformation that can happen in that organization. It may take 1 to 2 to 3 years to do, but I think that's a really good mechanism to shift those organizations along that spectrum. And there's a lot of deep work that probably needs to happen as part of that. But the idea to start an organization off with a purpose statement, I think, goes back to that comment that that's not enough. That's making them feel like they're doing that work without doing the work deeply. And if you look at the range of risks that those organizations now have that probably weren't there 10 to 15 years ago, they've got direct environmental risks around their supply chain. They're directly affected by flood, food continuity, supply chain continuity. I know an organization that has 51, I think the future work's a big problem in terms of fulfilling roles at the moment. Well, it's an organization that had 51 employees that they're kind of looking to attract at the moment, can't fill those roles. They are partly purpose-driven or purpose-driven anyway. So there's these dynamics of that organization sitting there going and saying, well, I can't just focus on these just profits because I'm getting this investor pressure. I can't attract staff, and my business model is being directly affected by these forces that probably previously wasn't. There's probably social issues that are affecting it. So, there's a mining company who's doing some great work transitioning to renewables, but there's domestic violence in one of their communities that's really high, and that social issue is directly affecting their workforce. So there's these social and environmental issues that are affecting those organizations. So by putting a purpose statement in and not doing deep impact work, it's not enough. It's not quick enough. So they have material risks at the board level that they need to address. So there's purpose statement is really important, but you need to do that deep work to say, what are the material things that are important for my business to have a net positive impact on? What are the things directly affecting my business? And what actually may start to disrupt my business and make it less relevant over time in the near future, medium future, and longer term? And that's what the work I think that organizations could start on, if they're particularly larger ones, because those risks are materially going to affect them. So do that work first, and then say, now how can we evolve our business model over a period of time to work towards the fact that every single dollar creates a net positive impact? What's that journey we're going to take? What are the causes we need to champion and materially build into our business model? How do we evolve our products, services, and innovate? How do we change our financing? How do we change our culture? And then say, what's our purpose statement in order to sort of drive that change?
To be the thing that kind of wraps around it. And
like almost embeds it as like the North Star.
yeah.
It's like that thing. The purpose statements, when they work really well, are that thing when anyone in that organization sees a behavior and goes, we shouldn't be doing that.
That's not what we do. Yeah.
And that Rio Tinto, we were at a conference last week, and one of the board members from Rio Tinto was on the stage and talking about that mine site that was blown up as for that Indigenous mine site. And that was really, really, really sad. But the key thing that he mentioned was that the culture, someone in that team, it just never made sense to actually do that. Where was that purpose and that culture driving the decision to say that doesn't make sense? Because by blowing up that, ancient, hugely culturally important mine site, that only was 1 day's worth of minerals that they extracted from it, and they didn't need to do it. So that's a type of behavior that you want purpose to avoid and navigate through in terms of the challenges that an organization has, and that's better for everyone.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, because I think the number of organizations I've worked for historically where the values are on the wall or they're even ingrained in stone on in the head office, and we don't actually do that. We just put that there because they look good. And
and then you go in. How many times have you gone into an organization, a big one, and they've all got great intention. There's normally great leaders that say, and you go and interview employees and say, do you know the values? And they're literally sitting out maybe on a wall and they're like, I don't know them. And you're like, you walk past them every day. It's like, well, no one's ever talked about them. They're not on our scorecards. We never were even like orientated around them when we joined, but they're just stickers on a wall. And it happens more often than not.
100%. Or when we're doing purpose work, so what's your current purpose statement? Oh, hang on, I just have to go and find it on the website. And one company, like half an hour later, she was still reading it. I'm like, well, that's catchy. No wonder you had to Google your own purpose statement. It generally feels though that there is some change happening, and we're moving from that sort of corporate bullshit bingo. Just pick 5 sayings, put them all, get some big posters with some motivational pictures. We're all good to go. And get a brand agency to go and write us a new purpose statement, put it on the wall. I think it is refreshing. And when we're talking to people about if we get what we call be curious people, because I guess my theory of change at Grow Good is if we can accelerate the people getting on that B Corp journey to start that, I think that's really the role we're playing exceptionally well right now. Is look, you're transitioning from the old world to the new world. You're not really sure. You need some help getting into this new way of thinking. So I think that's the big part we try to play.
I think that's really good. Well, I think our role, which is evolving, which is clearer. So I think that's a really great to get that. We always said there's always that B Corp champion organization. If you can elevate them, get their voice heard, and get that to sometimes it's the CEO, sometimes it's the leadership team, but that it influences that transformation. A lot of great can happen. Our role at Purpose Made, because I guess there is that element of like really empowering that person that comes in. Like normally there's someone that reaches out and wants a change to happen. But generally speaking, we are working with executives, and what we want if the executive does come to us and is interested in doing the work, that's great, and we want to champion that. But what we want to do in those organizations is to start to see the reputational risk and the business model risks that happens at an organization if they don't do this work. And so that's almost sitting there going, I need to start doing this work because it's going to impact my business and I'm not doing the right thing. So it's building that awareness to say, and that kind of need to say, I need to start this journey. And I think if you kind of have, the B Corp champions or purpose champions in the organizations, and you have these executive sponsors that are willing to sort of go on this journey, then you have a really amazing mix of transformation that can happen.
100%. I call them the concerned citizens. And we quite often get a call or hey, look, I'm middle manager in this company and I really love B Corp and I'd love for us to be a B Corp. How do I convince the CEO that this is the thing?
That's a nice way of framing it.
I mean,
it happens a lot.
What I think it's really interesting when we're talking to companies who have maybe heard of B Corp and they're just starting their impact journey or ESG journey, and they're like, we're not 100% sure whether actually we're ready to do this. And I think we've alluded to a lot of it, but we say, look, there's 4 reasons why you need to think about this. Your customers will start demanding this. Your employees will want this. Your investors will be increasingly demanding it, and or you're at the back end of a supply chain who will be coming to you to say, hey, I need to know what your footprint is, and I want to know what social impact you're having as a business. So exactly. I met with one CEO of a company recently who a concerned citizen had introduced me. And my tip to all concerned citizens is ask your CEO what are the top 3 things keeping them awake at night, because whatever's keeping them awake at night, there is probably a purpose or impact lens that they just have not considered, because historically it's just not been on the radar of senior executives to think about sustainability, purpose, and impact as a way of solving a problem. But it's normally talent attraction, talent retention, we looking for investment to grow, like it's that kind of stuff. And you go, well, great.
Yes.
There's this thing called B Corp or impact that actually the evidence would suggest will help you solve that problem. So could we just have that conversation? And have you met Tim Loftus? Maybe he should be Tim 3 of Purpose.
Oh, he could be.
Tim, he was at Kathmandu and trying to get them on the B Corp journey, and he realized that he had to kind of, I think it's called the Dunphy model of sustainability, where you start off with, at the beginning, it's actively rejecting the idea of sustainability or impact, and then it's kind of begrudgingly realizing that you might have to do it, and then it's kind of I don't think the next phase is kind of like we start doing it and we recognize that there might be actually an operational saving or a benefit to the company, and then you move into, okay, actually this really good, purpose and impact is now strategy. But yeah, he always talked about how he was just trying to get some little wins to begin with, and he really wanted to get LEDs into their stores, and he sold it as an economic argument to say, well, actually it's going to reduce your power bill by possibly millions of dollars at their scale. And so yeah, he got the argument, and that's what we're finding with some companies is, like you say, actually you kind of need to be thinking about this just from reputational or strategic needs, not from stretching you to do more good or get into this kind of do good or business for good area. It's like, actually this is almost becoming table stakes and business as usual, which is really interesting. This one CEO, he was like, I don't really believe in this stuff, but I recognize I have to believe in this stuff for the future workforce that I need to employ. And it's like, well, I kind of don't mind that you're not fully into this, but that you're going to do it anyway. Because I know that once it kind of like the journey that you went on, and I know the journey I've been on, once you start doing good, it's actually really contagious, and you want to do more good, and you recognize that actually it's not about the dollars coming in every week, it's about the impact that we're having and the good that we're doing. And so I kind of don't really care how you get into wanting to do more good, whether it's kind of by hook or by crook. It's like, once you're in, it's actually going to be really good for you, and it's like the chocolate covered carrot.
I think that is really interesting. There's two parts to that. One is obviously the leader that you're working with, and normally the CEO or the executive. I think it's really important that even though they might come in with a bit of skepticism, that it's really important as you go through that work that they are authentically believing in it and leading through that lens. And if that's not there, at the end of that process, there's a disconnect, and that's when cultures can get pretty scatty. And then the second part is that I do have a bias towards action. So I do really deeply believe in strategy and design and needing to do that work really well up front to know what you're actually meant to be doing. But I love, like, it's too often the case that organizations leave it at that point and they go, oh, I've got a beautiful, it's really interesting. A lot of the organizations we come in, they've got these great like reports and done all this trend stuff and everything. It's like, what? And they're like, we're stuck. We don't actually know how to turn this into action. I think that's a really important piece, that what we also believe in is it's not like a direct transformation overnight. Let's start with something small that we can pilot to show the value of this. So even putting LED lights in the shop fronts to save money, that's a bloody great way to start. But there's also ways of doing that where you pilot it, prove it works, then scale it. And so playing sometimes to business rules that currently exist is useful, and there's ways of getting business cases across the line, which we do often, piloting things, testing things. And if you can kind of start there and someone's willing to do it, that's when you go, okay, they're in, they're committed, and we can prove that this thing can work. As long as you've done the design strategy, know that thing it might not work, but generally speaking, you've done the work to say that's something really good to do. That's when things will cut. Oh, hang on, we put the LED lights in. Why don't we put that into our headquarters? Okay, maybe we should start saving some water here. Oh, let's look at our products. How can we actually maybe adopt some of those principles in here and save some money and actually do some good? And then all of a sudden, it's like that person starts to get quite obsessed by like, how do we save money and do impact at the same time? And it starts to become an embedded decision-making piece of the whole business, and that transformation starts to kind of gather momentum, and it can happen really quickly.
100%. Yeah. There's a little a cartoon I've got, and it's of these two sort of Buddhist monks, and one's deep in meditation and the other one's got one eye open, saying to the other one out of the corner of his mouth, have you ever thought about quitting this for a life of mindless consumerism? And for me, it just encapsulates that journey, because once you start recognizing that doing good actually can do good for you and the business, it like you say, just start baking it in. Okay, right, that's now the new normal. Okay, where else can we test this and try this? And you get that contagion spreading across companies. Super cool.
one of the stories that I had was at Suncorp, and this was, many years ago, and obviously weather is a really important element to an insurance company. And I remember that there was some policies in place around climate change, but what we wanted to put in place was actually there was no real policy around no real policy around climate change and a real kind of like statement around it. And I remember like people sniffing around and starting it. And I remember getting a group together and someone was interested in a particular location and we were in this sort of innovation department. I said, oh, can we get together and maybe have start a conversation around this piece? And so what we did is we did that. And then, I had one, this is like that kind of, when you got the dancer and the second person joins and all of a sudden there's a whole party happening. That person, then we had a meeting and we're like, oh, maybe we can pull together a group. And I said, yeah, feel free to invite people. And then there was 3 people at the next meeting. And then we said, oh, we should probably gather people together to sort of have this as a pretty important conversation. And all of a sudden, there's 60 people in the room. And I was like, facilitating this conversation about why climate policy is important to ensure and how might we go ahead with doing this. And all of a sudden it was amazing. Like all of a sudden there's this like group saying, I've been caring about this for so long and now I've got an avenue to talk about it. We can now turn this into action and change our policy and products and evolve what we're doing in our capital spending. And a lot of that foundational work and that one conversation that started with that has now translated into some really great work, which obviously I haven't been a part of for a long time. But that's just a moment to say, like, even in those organizations that may feel like they have a bit of a latent purpose, and Suncorp is a really great element around community and helping people feel safe, but you wouldn't call it a purpose-driven organization.
Yep.
But once you gave people that avenue to tap into something that they care directly about, a movement's created and something changes very rapidly because those people are in that organization, they're caring about it, thinking about it, but for some reason, they don't feel like they can express and lend, like almost like focus their amazing talents on something that could actually be really powerful and important.
Yeah. And that's why I'm a big fan of, I think, the B Corp with the purpose, because if you just do purpose work without, like I said, that underpinning of a theory of change or measurement of impact, potential to get distracted or go off on less impactful journeys. But equally, if you're trying to create change and get impact and measure report stuff without the meaning and the purpose connected to it, it's just another KPI that I don't understand. What okay, great. I'm now just reporting a different thing to my boss. I don't care about it. And so that's, I'm kind of really big. And I just love that whole purpose thing, just seeing people understand that, I can bring the things that I care about possibly to my job and have a metric and be reporting and working on something internally that actually fulfills more than just my requirements to and get my pay at the end of the month.
Yeah, we've had some really magical moments when when we did the reporting when I was running Roy, which was a startup that we created, which is still going today, which I was running for a number of years. But remember, we would set up these reporting frameworks and go into organizations that were, probably purpose driven, but they were like care organizations and you go in and show them, like you do the measurement, then you present it to their leadership team and staff. You had people crying. They were like, oh my God, I knew the work we were doing through the stories we're creating, but this is so meaningful to me because I know that I'm creating a difference and now I can see the figures for it. So there's a difference there to going in an organization and setting an ESG or a B Corp framework and then ticking boxes and things like that and compliance. Oh, yep, I've got that sticker on there and I've clicked that and ticked that. There's a policy done to like, here's the purpose that you're contributing to. Here's the evidence that shows that you're actually, making a difference. Yep. And that's what it's all about. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I've always said if your purpose, thinking about your purpose, that's kind of doesn't make you cry, then it's not purpose. It's a marketing statement. Yeah,
that's a great lens. It wakes you well up, and you see it every day. Like when with the work we're doing, you're like, I feel it. I'm like, whoa, there's the magic. There's that piece where it's really tapped into that organization. We've kind of like pulled out like the hearts and the minds and the sweat and the tears and the effort, as well as the pragmatic business side that says this is what the world needs. This is what's deeply underlying in terms of what you're solving for, and this is how you contribute to it. And once you get that magic, you can feel it in the room and you can see it in the eyes and hearts and minds of everyone you're working with. That's the kind of the purpose magic.
100%, man. Yeah, it's sort of tangibly intangible.
Which is, I think, your point about like you go back to like what humans are all about. They're all about caring, connection. That's what we're probably on. We kind of got away from that humanness, and that's been eradicated from education and businesses. And when you can bring that back into an organization, you can connect to something meaningful. God, it feels good, and it also makes a difference for the world and the societies around us.
Yeah. What a crazy idea. It might catch
Yeah.
on, mate.
Yeah, it might. It certainly is at the moment.
It
Yeah.
feels like it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like you say, yeah, you know, when you were sort of doing your work at Suncorp, you connected to B Corp, you know, when we first connected 2016, 2017, it just felt like a desert of like, oh my gosh, this is such a hard uphill push. Whereas now it feels like we're actually maybe pushing the rock downhill ever so slightly. And
Yeah.
it's just getting a bit of momentum on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when the first workshop, I was working with B Lab when we got together some of the early B Corps. I was in a room and I facilitated this sort of model, which is a bit of a systems model, and it talks about how systems regenerate essentially. And it goes through this kind of phase of building, and then it goes through a phase of conservation. And then there's a bit of what something the systems probably, needs to shift or change. And so that's called the kind of the breaking point, and then something tips and then changes, and it goes through a phase of learning and renewal to create something new. And I always get with the B Corp thing, I got people to plot where they thought it was at. And there's a lot of people saying that the economic system is in conservation. And we started to identify what things would need to shift and change in order for that renewal and breaking point to occur. And I think I've kind of back to that model, which is probably a similar analogy to pushing the rock up the hill. I feel it turned that corner, and those levers that we identified have shifted and they're starting to change. And there's something really interesting happening at the moment, where that we're learning about what the old system needs to change, and that renewal phase is coming, which is really fascinating, and exciting at the same time. But also, I think the responsibility to get this right now is really important. So it needs to be done really well. We need to prove this works. It needs to become the new paradigm of business, and the economy needs to shift, and this needs to be the new normal. And that's on a lot of our shoulders and the people we work with to pioneer and continue to pioneer this. Not even pioneer, because it's sort of becoming more mainstream, but take on that leadership challenge to help us sort of navigate through this important period.
Yeah, man, it's super interesting time to be doing this stuff. So you bumped into B Corp when you were at Suncorp. B Corp, Suncorp, there we go, that's good. And this would have been what, 2015, 2014? Well, B Lab was 2014.
Yeah, so it was 2014, and B Corp was just coming through Small Giants, bringing that out to Australia, and we got involved in that early conversation. And then essentially I was at the launch of it in Melbourne. So that was, there was
OG.
Yeah, it was very early days. It was pretty exciting actually, but something I very much believed in, the principles of.
Yeah. And so then you left Suncorp to start Hatched, was that right?
Yeah, so Hatched, and then Hatched became a B Corp in 2017. And through doing that work, I would be working with organizations like Silver Chef, which was a B Corp, helped them recertify. We worked with ESOP, which has become a B Corp, and a range of, I think, very kind of organizations that were starting to grow and move internationally and had probably purpose at their core, but were like thinking that through as how do we, embed B Corp, but also how do we, expand our business model as we're kind of growing, which was always a challenge that I thought was really interesting. Yeah.
And so, so I guess you really had front row seats to the whole B Corp thing, which would introduce you to the concept, and you were fully.
Well, lucky enough,
a pretty obvious decision, I guess, for you to go, we should probably be a B Corp.
It was like, it was a dream to work for a B Corp, so why not create one? So that was sort of the piece of the puzzle when I was coming out of Suncorp, and it was just, I mean, we did B Corp certification, so we should be able to apply that to ourselves. And we got to go to we got to work with the sort of the founders in the US, and we got to go to a lot of the different B Corp conferences in the different regions, and really get to know the businesses really well. And every time we had those connections and conversations, it just reaffirmed that this is the way the business needs to head and go. And B Corp is not perfect in terms of the certification, but it's evolving and changing. And it's a really, when you compare it to many of the other alternatives or even to ESG standards, it's a really great framework for organizations to be part of.
100% agree. It's not a silver bullet. There's some stuff that it asks you that I don't agree with. There's stuff that I don't think it asks you that I think it should ask you. But it's the only framework that's globally recognized, independently verified, and social and environmental performance.
Exactly.
So let's go with that for now. And I mean, and I guess they're always really good at taking stakeholder engagement from the B Corp community, but also from anyone else who wants to have a conversation with them about what it should look like. And I think you and I were very similar. We certified 2016, and it was very much a case of I like this B Corp idea. oh, but there's only 2 B Corps in the country. Neither of them are hiring, and even if they were, neither of them really do anything that I could probably do. So yeah, stuff it. I'll start my own one. In for a penny, in for a pound. Yeah.
That's it.
So yeah, fun times. And then so your B Corp journey pretty quick, I'd imagine. You knew your way around it. You'd been doing all this stuff. So yeah, and you then obviously
I
built a
think we
business around
started the
helping
business
people.
in
So
2016, day one. You have to have a year's worth of revenue.
yeah.
So I was literally, we were working towards it. As soon as we hit
Yeah.
the 12 months to the day, we
It's like
we did submitted it and done. We pretty much became a B Corp, immediately. So it
nice.
was fundamental to my philosophy around business at the time and my deep passion for it. And it's really important for me as a business owner too to say, I standing for this purpose, but I want to make sure that my business is being built in that way. And a lot of that was less externally focused as a passion for mine around, it does actually lead to a lot of business development, great new connections, meeting someone like yourself, but like there's been so many benefits business wise for us to become a B Corp. But ultimately it was for me to say, I've got that stamp to say I'm running my business in the right way. And I'm taking account of, it's not perfect, but I'm taking account of all the important things that I need to when I'm running it. And that's to me, the most important part of B Corp for me.
Yeah, totally. I just kind of think if you're involved in the purpose, impact, ESG, sustainability space, if you're not certified independently around your own footprint, it's kind of like, really? What are you hiding? What's not going on? So yeah, I think with what I do, when I started Grow Good, we were very much more around sales training because that was my background. And so for me, B Corp was just a movement that I fell in love with, and just coming out, having like a hard Brexit from the corporate world, realizing that there's a lot more than just chasing money, and chasing money at a business level can lead to really bad outcomes. My background was selling medical devices, and the companies knowingly killing people in the operating theatre whilst chasing profit over patient outcomes. So you kind of go, the one industry that should be about just helping people isn't. Okay, so what are all the other ones doing where actually they don't have to worry about people at all? It's like, so and same for me. I was never not going to be a B Corp. So, and I think that the early group of B Corps, that sort of the founding B Corps across all countries, typically have been very, very much driven by, this is just what I'm going to do. Right. Whereas now, it is almost getting into this phase of, okay, actually there's a market imperative for me to do this. But obviously, it would be hard for me to be a B Corp consultant or helping people with their B Corp journey if I wasn't a B Corp myself and hadn't done the hard yards. So it's massively important to my business now for a lot of other reasons. But
it gives you integrity.
The core of it,
100%. I mean, if you're consulting on people and even purpose, but on B Corp and you're not a B Corp, well, there's definitely a mismatch there. And I think, if you look at the use cases now, particularly for the larger companies that come to us to get supported, it is different. I mean, there is a piece of, there's maybe what did you call them? The sort of the change maker internally. There's that
the concerned citizen.
Concerned citizen coming who's saying, I want to become a B Corp because they're passionate about the movement, maybe similar kind of to us. But then in the organization, it says, okay, I want to go down that pathway. There is an element of, I'd be proud to have this stamp next to me, but there is a piece here which is saying, this is going to help my business. This is going to help me with my reporting. This is going to help. There's a bit of a practical lens that's also applied to it. And I think there's also a recognition that there is a lot of ESG reporting and standards, and it's getting pretty confusing. And, some might say that B Corp certification is part of that, but it's an elevation. It's almost saying your whole business is certified. And it's almost like you stand out from the ESG crowd when you have that B Corp certification, particularly if you're either publicly listed or a multinational. That's not an easy thing to achieve. So it is. There's also an elevation of like, it's bloody hard to get, and so that also it elevates it in terms of that having that there, and it fits in nicely to some of the other reporting requirements that are sitting there as well.
Yeah, totally. I give the same talk with different titles, and one of the titles is, if ESG is the question, is B Corp the answer? It's like it is confusing. There's all these frameworks. Well, pick the best one that is good. Because I think the other thing with B Corp, been reflecting on this recently. I worked for a company previously that was going through ISO, so it wasn't the environmental 14,001. It was that 14,001? It was more around process and procedural stuff. I didn't walk out of having been a part of that process going to all my friends and relatives, oh my gosh, like you guys should do ISO, it's so cool. But B Corp, for some reason, seems to have captured the hearts and minds and imaginations of employees and customers in particular, who, even having gone through as I describe it, a rigorous but achievable process, people get through it, and you see it on LinkedIn all the time or Facebook. Hey, we're a B Corp. I never see anyone say, "Hey, we're ISO certified," or "Hey, we've done some other, we're Six Sigma," or whatever it is. It's like, it's really interesting how B Corp, and I don't feel it was intentional, because the B Lab is a very certification focused. They're not a marketing led company, yet they seem to have created this marketing desire cachet around the assessment.
Yeah, and I think the way I'd frame that is that when you talk to the founders, there was always that element of, to some degree, this was sort of, I wouldn't say it just bluntly, but this is sort of a boring sort of like almost like a playbook for businesses that we want all to adopt. And that's true. But the other elements they always talked about was movement creating. And that's a really important element where you can connect unlikely businesses together. So this isn't a certification for accountants or like financial advisors. This is for anyone, any organization. So it is amazing when you meet another B Corp and they go, hey, I make ice cream, or hey, I'm an architect. You're like, wow. But we're all kind of like, there's some sort of alignment there, which is really interesting. But I think the fundamental component of that is this sort of movement creating. And then there's an aspirational component to seeing organizations like a Patagonia being a B Corp, or, a Purpose Made that everyone looks up to. I'm just joking. But there is an element there where they look up these brands and say, look, they're amazing brands that I really admire. And so I want to be part of that too. And I want my organization to sort of hold myself in the same esteem as that, from an accountability perspective, that I am doing the right thing, not from a, hey, I want to hang out with the cool kids at Patagonia. This is, I want to make sure I'm doing my business right. And so I think the components of movement building have been really important around this, around, B Corps being encouraged to connect and help each other, elements around procurement, working together and collaborating. There's been a lot of great things put in place by the community to do that sort of stuff. And there's some great examples in New Zealand that you've been part of as well. And I think that's been a really important piece to the movement. So it's almost been, I want to be part of this because I want to contribute to something bigger. And I also have this sort of aspirational piece to sort of, my business or my work to sort of be in that mix of those organizations doing good stuff. So I think there's a really important thing that we can't overlook here about the movement that's being created, and that community part of this element that is keeping it going faster and quicker than ever. And I think that's what organizations also need to be aware of about their employees and the investors going, I want to be part of that movement. I want to work or invest in those companies. So there's a bit of there's a bit of that whole of like falling behind if you're not sort of, along that spectrum.
100%. And so what, I mean, I think I was going to ask you, like, what does being a B Corp mean to you? But I think we possibly kind of covered that. But yeah, so I guess running your business as a leader of a business, of a small business, but also a leader of a movement. What do you find a challenge between balancing purpose and profit for yourself? Or do you feel like you are like one of the OG purpose people? So I feel like you're pretty dialed in on we're probably not going to do some work for you because it doesn't align with us.
Yeah, I mean, there is challenges, obviously, running a small business, and there's a big contract on the table and there's money sitting there. But it's I intrinsically believe that if you have purpose and impact embedded in your model, you will actually make and be better off financially. And I think that if I was going to go start, I started a business that wasn't necessarily purpose driven when I was 15 years ago, and it didn't really work out. And I think that was because I wasn't clear on why I was doing it. And I think that drives you every day. So I think that purpose and profit isn't necessarily a trade-off for us. I think that comes with some challenges. So there's some work that you have to say no to. For example, there was a conversation, a couple of weeks ago with an amazing advertising agency where they do work with gambling companies and stuff. And there was some talk about services. And I'm like, well, we just don't do that work. We do the social impact, environmental impact piece. So that's what we focus on. But I think that focus is good. And I think it also enables you to know that, we're a services firm. So if you're starting to work, nightmare clients, if you can sort of, generally a nightmare client is someone who's inauthentic with their impact and purpose. And so you get into that work, you're like, hang on, this is like actually there's something wrong here, the culture's here. And we do navigate and work through that because this work's important. We make that commitment. And we also are very clear around working and calling that out in a responsible and ethical way. But it helps us navigate where the good opportunities are as well. So I think
Yep.
from our perspective, it's not a trade-off. It helps us. The only thing is probably the biggest challenge is that there's so many problems that we want to help solve for. We've got to be careful with our time. So it's easy to go and want to help a not-for-profit who probably doesn't have funding. It's easy to move. We started 2 startups, so that's a really important piece of our work, but it's also spreads your time more thinly. So it's really important to us that we're focused on where we can create the biggest impact. And for us, probably we can't be as distracted or spread too thinly with trying to help as many people as we can, which is sort of innately part of our personality. So that's been a lesson in the early days where probably 25 to 30% of our work was pro bono. And you think, well, actually, we need to make sure that's paid work that's creating that really important impact. Let's do that, but we can't viably support that many businesses without fees attached to it.
Which is reasonable. In the current economic paradigm.
It would be great. Economic paradigm where there's a universal base wage and all those sort of things exist, and we can go out and just literally go and find the biggest challenges to focus on to solve them. We do that generally speaking. That's how we focus our work, but we also are minded about where's funding coming from, who can we support, how can we make sure that we're viable so we're still around to keep solving these problems. And we're also showcasing that you can build a successful agency that is purpose driven, having big change, because that will also attract the talent to do this work, more people to do this work, as opposed to going, oh well, we just need to be an advertising company that sells cigarettes and gambling. You don't want that.
And you can't fill from an empty cup. You've got to be able to be long-term sustainable.
The business element of purpose work is important, to be very business savvy in what you're doing, and I think we can't underestimate that. We're not saying that we're doing purpose and that doesn't have those business components. You've got to be really good at business to be doing purpose, if not better, because you're working in more uncharted territory and more emerging industries more generally.
Totally. So I guess final question, looking 10 years into the future, what does the B Corp movement look like?
Interesting question. I probably haven't projected that far forward, but in terms of, that kind of spectrum we talked about earlier, from kind of like more conservative businesses who just focus on purpose to every dollar essentially making an impact. Ideally speaking, there's a necessity for a B Corp certification and ESG reporting, because what it's doing is necessitating that people are actually accountable for reporting on things they're not doing at the moment, or elevating organizations to do things that they should be doing. And so these things around, safety is an example that's sort of annoying in this space, because everyone's safety, but safety is a great example where people have embedded directly, those problems with workplace industry injuries and horrific deaths in work sites and stuff like that, and organizations have embedded that culturally into it. So safety is always in the boardroom, number one, and there's key metrics like lost time injury that are straight front and center that every single investor is asking for. So for me, what tends to happen is that this sort of that model I talked about before, we're at a breaking tipping point. There's a renewal, and so we can really start to see a new economy starting to emerge where there's not this debate around purpose versus profit. It's like this is not even a thing. Like every organization should be contributing socially, environmentally, because they won't be around if they don't. And secondly, they create more value if they do. And then all the reporting standards start to almost disappear as shock horror that we need to do this stuff, to saying it just makes sense to reporting on the stuff because we need to run our business well. So there's sort of instead of it sort of being an elevation or like a big sticker that you put on your shoulder to say I'm a B Corp or I've done this sort of ESG piece, it's like it just starts to disappear and saying this is just how we do things, and it becomes not even the new normal, but it's deeply embedded into organizations in terms of the way they're working, and there's not a choice or an alternative not to do it. And there'll be more B Corps, there'll be more reporting requirements, there'll be more investors, staff, and customers looking for this stuff, no matter what people are saying. And it is the new normal, but it becomes something that isn't different or new. It's just what we do.
Yeah. No, I kind of tend to agree. And I think the general trend is heading in that direction. Like you said, the big end of town, you've now got mandatory disclosures around environmental performance. It's, give it 2 to 3 years, are they going to say, actually, we now need to know about it's going to be mandatory to report on the risk of human slavery in your supply chain. That's now another
Absolutely.
thing you have to do. So yeah, and I think it's the smart
You can
businesses.
see mental health of employees
Yeah,
coming.
yep.
Talk about safety, physical safety. What about mental safety?
Mental
That's
safety.
another thing that
Yeah.
it's not on the radar, but you could see that coming definitely.
Yeah. Interesting times, man. Interesting times to be alive. And I keep saying to the people like ourselves who've been pushing this idea for a few years, we'll look back in, what are we now? I mean, we're sort of, are you 40 in your 40s? Yeah. So what, in 40 years time, when we're all in the B Corp rest home on Mars, well, God, do you remember that in 2016 when there was only like 5 B Corps? God, do you remember that? When everyone, we'll be those crazy people that they look back on and go, oh yeah, it was those Tims of Purpose that did it.
Yeah, well, hopefully we're not on Mars, and the planet, we're looking on the planet and it's regenerative. And they're a very happy place, and then there's a lot more happier people, and the environment's happy, and that would be a very, very meaningful thing to be just sit back and go, thankfully we got here.
We did it. Yeah.
No,
100%.
Yeah.
Well, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure. We haven't actually connected for quite a while because you've been busy, I've been busy. We need to do it more often, and we'll get Tim 3 of Purpose, Tim Loftus, involved, and he'll no doubt introduce us to Tim's 4 and 5. And we'll have our own conference, Tim's of Purpose. Maybe. But no, mate, keep on keeping on. Genuinely love the work that you do. I've always looked up to the work that you do, and I feel re-energized and feel like there's more that I could be doing now, having heard more about the cool stuff that you're up to. So yeah, thanks, buddy, and
thank you.
Keep on going.
Yeah, real pleasure. Love the conversation, and looking forward to collaborating more.
Yeah, man. I feel like there's going to be a second episode we need to do to go deeper on some of the stuff. Yeah.
Well, sounds good. Sign me up.
Awesome. All right, cheers, buddy.
All right. Catch you later.
Hey, it's Tim here, that B Corp bloke from Grow Good. If you want more content on purpose, B Corp, how to do more good in the world as an individual or a business, then you know the drill. Hit the like and subscribe. Check out some of our other videos. They're probably floating around here somewhere. You know how it works. Thank you so much. See you next time.